Hello and welcome to the Swine Disease Reporting System. This is the report number 93. My name is Guilherme Caesar here at SDRS Studio.
Hello, Giovanni Trevisan of the SDRS team.
Hello, we're with the SDRS team.
And today we're going to cover the findings of October 2025. And before we go to our findings, I would like to introduce our guest today. That's Dr. Brooke Kitting that is joining us the SDRS podcast today. Dr. Kitting received her VDM degree from the University of Pennsylvania, and since graduation, she joined the Seaboard Foods as a swine production veterinarian and further worked as director of South Farm Health in the same company. Currently, Dr. Kitting is a senior veterinarian at the Seaboard Foods, leading health strategies of over 280,000 sows and 3 million growing pigs in Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, and Colorado. In today's episode, Dr. Kitting will discuss the findings of October with further some health strategy for swine herds. Welcome to the SDRS podcast and welcome to the advisory board members as well, Dr. Kitting.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Kitting, to be here with us talking about the SDRS findings. Guilherme, I know there was a busy month in October there with pathogen activity and also advisory group meetings. Can you bring up to speed what's happening there?
Yeah, Giovanni, for sure. First, the propaganda for the winter preparedness call that we had this month is a nice meeting that we do with the advisory board that we discuss the upcoming trends for the winter and strategies that we can do to prevent the disease spreadness, for example. And we had a nice discussion that we're going to go through the podcast as well as some of the questions. But if you miss it in the case, you're going to have a bonus page in the report that you can see the highlights of that and the highlights of the advisory group for the findings that we have for this upcoming winter. But moving right now to the activity of October, we're starting to have the colder months and then the activity of some pathogens increase. First, for PRRS virus, as always, the winter market positivity is increasing to 43%, a lot of activity for PRRS, but the South Farm remains relatively low, but we didn't start the winter yet, so let's see what's going to come for the South Farm specifically. But when we look to the state level monitoring, that's not normal in October. We are having a lot of states with activity above expected when we go to the historical baseline. So Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Indiana, and North Carolina are having PRRS virus activity above the expected. And when we go to the sequence part, PRRS virus L1C.5, the lineage L1C.5, achieved 3,653 detections in 2024, for example, and in 2025, sorry, and this is 400 more detections than in 2024, for example. And as a reminder, we have the entire winter to come, which might increase this number, and we're gonna break the record in number of detections pretty high compared with 2024. And another fact that is predominance of this lineage that we are looking at is that a lot of states are have the L1C.5 as a predominant strain circulating over there. And this is even decreasing the activity of other lineages, as for example, L1A and L1H, that we are having less activity. The example for that we have is Ohio and Oklahoma, that didn't have a lot of activity of the L1C.5 in the past, and right now they're having more predominance of this specific lineage circulating in the field.
That's a great point, Guilherme, that you mentioned about the weather there. This is one of the things that the advisory group mentioned for us, that there is a delay in the weather temperature, so we may see more impact of pathogens coming up in the upcoming weeks there as the temperatures cool down. What updates do you have for enteric coronavirus?
For enteric coronavirus, the focus would be PED, that the overall positivity remains low at 4% of positive cases, but with a highest detection coming from the winter market category, where we have 7% of positive submissions. And the state level monitoring, we see specific states suffering a little bit more in the October. That is Oklahoma, Indiana, and North Carolina are having activity above the expected when we look to the historical baseline.
And any updates from Mycoplasma pneumoniae, influenza, these other pathogens that we monitor on the SDRS?
Yeah, Giovanni, for Mycoplasma, for example, we achieved 30% of winter market positive submissions, which was in a little bit of a sharp increase in the South Farms, but the positivity was really low before, and right now we are achieving 12% of positive submissions in the South Farm. But it's good to differentiate this positivity between the states. For example, Oklahoma had more positive cases for Mycoplasma, but when we look to the database, a lot of them are deep tracheal swabs or lung homogenate, which means that are having more protocols of intent exposure for the herds. And different from Iowa, that we are seeing more lung clinical cases coming from the growth finishing side. So it might be more clinical activity of Mycoplasma going on in the finishing sites in Iowa. And when we look to influenza, as expected, we have this B seasonality positivity. Spring, we have a high activity of influenza. Fall, we have as well, and it's going on right now as expected, with 36% of pod submissions in the growth finishing sites. The surprise is the sow farm that remains really low, that usually historically we have around 20% of pod submissions, and right now we are having 15% of pod submissions of influenza in the sow farms.
Hey, Guilherme, thank you for those updates there. Brooke, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for serving as a advisory board. And as Guilherme mentioned, PRRS virus is one of the hot topics in the swine industry there. Oklahoma, specifically, when we look for 2024 and 2025, we see an increase in detection of lineage 1C.5 going on in the state there and growing those numbers there. So L1C.5 has been disseminated information that's more aggressive than other strains there. We want to pick your brain. Can you explain for us what is the impact of having a well-known PRRS virus becoming into of your state, and how strategies and tips that you can share with us to contain the clinical implications of such a virus like this one?
Yeah, of course. So prior to January of 2025, the PRRS virus 144L1C had been undetected in the southwestern United States. And there's no science behind this statement, but it seems like the aggressive strains that are found in the upper Midwest typically take about 2 to 2.5 years to make their way down to the southwestern United States. And so the detection in January of 2025 definitely came as a surprise. We performed a disease outbreak investigation and really found no links to explain how the virus made its way. The first detection was actually in Texas. And so the outbreaks that we've had with this PRRS strain has been all across the board, all the way from an incidental finding on wean pig monitoring to what I would call a moderate outbreak with increases in miscarriages and effects in pre-weaning mortality in downstream pigs. Have not had an outbreak severe enough to warrant live virus exposure and extended closure. We have closed a few farms with the intent to take farms back to baseline production, but have not had a severe outbreak that would warrant any other interventions. So some things that we employ when we have any PRRS outbreak, not just 144L1C, but any PRRS outbreak, whether it's a new introduction or a recirculation of a otherwise endemic strain. We typically vaccinate the herd. We utilize MLV as a mainstay in our program. We also provide medicated feed in the form of CTC for the sows. And then we also have found value in supportive care.
Good comments there. And you mentioned that some of these outbreaks has not been very aggressive as previously disseminated there. We know that the region that you're talking, there was circulation of lineage 1E, lineage 1H, that is also known historically to be some aggressive PRRS strains. Can you explain for us how you see the comparison between lineage 1H, 1E compared with lineage 1C.5 is similar, and any biosecurity, biocontainment practices that you can take over to reduce the spread of this disease across regions?
Yeah, so the L1E virus was a historic LVI virus that we used in gilt acclimation for a very long time. And so we continue to find that in our sow herds. And from the standpoint of severity, I mean, we've had very severe L1E outbreaks, we've had very severe L1H outbreaks, and we've had mild to moderate L1C outbreaks. And so have yet to experience an outbreak that is as detrimental as some of the L1E and L1H or L1A. I would even add a lot of the bad outbreaks that we've had in recent past have been due to L1A or 174L1A. So yeah, we've had L1E, of course, continues to be prevalent in the area, and L1H is definitely our most prevalent lineage. And L1H seems to be the one that is lingering and continues to cause issues even in endemic farms where it's been present for many PRRS seasons or years. So in addition to biosecurity and biocontainment of diseases across production flows and regions, something that we used to do pretty poorly is management of pig flow. And so the systems down there were built, again, for efficiency. They were built as small sow farms, so 2,500 head sow farms, but very large nurseries. And so something that we were forced to do for a very long time is mix sow sources in the nursery. And what we've found as we've worked out of that system and really made an effort to single source nurseries and finishers is that we're seeing less lateral introductions of PRRS across nurseries and finishers and then back into sow farms. And so only predict that that's going to improve over time, but definitely something that we've put a lot of effort in to manage our pig flow and make sure that we're flowing pigs very intelligently into specific regions, areas, and not taking them into other areas. So something that has improved our lateral PRRS breaks and tracking it back to the sow farm.
And Dr. Kitting, we're moving right now of pathogens from PRRS to PED. And this last spring and summer, we had the record of cases in the VDLs here with a lot of oral fluids being submitted, over 1,000 oral fluids more compared with the previous years in terms of cases. And then, but the positivity remains really low. So it seems that we are doing a better job with this virus and we are doing more surveillance as well. So in your opinion, are we doing a better job with PED? And can you share some strategies that you do as a veterinarian in your production system to avoid this pathogen to have aggressive strains and to have clinical signs in the field?
Yeah, the SDRS's information and data, I would say, does not mirror our system data. This year was by far our worst PD year since 2013, 2014. And so from a response standpoint, our response is generally the same for every PD outbreak. We do 2 exposures and we do utilize killed vaccine. We do think that there's value in killed vaccine and boosting serum immunity in the sow herd population, especially ahead of entering the farrowing house. And then in terms of sanitation, using whitewash as a means to clean the farrowing house, we do not perform mass euthanasia of pigs. So we wean pigs down to 12 days of age into the nursery, provide extra supportive care for those pigs, and then try to mitigate losses in the future litters to be born in the farrowing house environment. And so this spring, typically our PED experience has been anytime after Thanksgiving all the way up through March is typically when we have not much room to breathe in terms of PED prevalence. And so after April 1st, we typically loosen our belt a little bit, breathe a little easier. But that was the opposite this year, where all of our PED breaks occurred after April 1st. And we had a flow that broke very rapidly that seemed to be tied to a point source introduction. And so as we were working through that disease investigative outbreak summary, we had it was recommended to us to do some ELISA work in the sows to determine if there was a point source introduction in terms of had all the sows seroconverted at the same time, which would suggest that the infections came at one time versus unique outbreaks to each other. And what we found was our P3, so parity 3 through 5, above parity 3 in summary, had very high serum immunity to PED, whereas our P1s and 2s, it was variable. About 50% of our P1s and P2s had serum immunity, and then our P0s had 0 serum immunity. And that is attributed to our previous exposure protocol. So we used to acclimate gilts to PED, and so we would expect the higher parity animals to have seen that virus before, even if they weren't infected at the sow farm. They were infected as a growing gilt to PED original strains, and so that's what we attributed that seroconversion to. And we also know in the literature that even in a previously exposed animal, if they are exposed to wild type virus, again, they're going to mount a immune response much faster than animals that were not exposed previously. And so that kind of got the questions rolling of what is the best way to, or what is the best way for us to control PED. And so that leads us into August of this year. We had some PED original breaks in a group of farms that were previously infected with PD indel, where we performed whole herd exposures. And we saw clinically pre-weaning mortality across the 6-farm complex never rose above about 26%. We had one farm that reached 31%, but we did find that there was cross protection between the PD indel exposure and the PD original outbreak. And so we did some immunity work in those farms. And as they were breaking, we bled farms ahead of breaking, and we found that, and we also pulled colostrum and milk, and we found that sows in farrowing that had been exposed to PD indel had very high titers in colostrum and milk to PD. And that was reflected in the pre-weaning mortality loss that we saw, which was hardly anything at all when you compare a PD original break in a otherwise naive herd or a herd that has not seen it in a very long time. You're going to have losses that exceeds 100%, and that's going to sustain for 4 weeks. And we did not see that in this field case study that I would call it, but it was real life. And so we took that information, and what we're going to do going into 2025 is we're going to be exposing gilts to PD indel. And I will be talking about this at AESV. I was asked to present some strategies to control PD at a system level. And one thing that I'm going to make clear is that the right answer for us isn't the right answer for everyone else. And so from a logistic operation standpoint, we cannot have the loss of PD that we had this year. And so for us to do the same thing next year would be improper and inappropriate. And so we're going to go ahead and give this a try and see if we can make an impact on our PD clinical outcomes, knowing that in our system, our biggest risk is our growing pig concentration around our sow farms. Those systems down there were built for efficiency. They were not built for biosecurity. And so we have sow farms centered right in the middle of hundreds of thousands of nursery and finishing spaces. We have PRRS positive sow farms. And so, of course, from a biocontainment, biosecurity standpoint, our risk in the growing pig population is high. And so we recognize that there's going to be some level of coronavirus from year to year, and our job is to mitigate those losses, not necessarily take those outbreaks to zero, but make sure that we can still produce pigs and keep pigs as healthy as possible. So that's what I would say about that.
Dr. Kitting, thanks for the comment on PED. So now we move to the Mycoplasma pneumonia. So in this fall season, we've seen that an increase of positive cases for this pathogen. However, most of the cases came from the deep tracheal swabs and lung homogeneity in specific states. Seems to be more surveillance for this pathogen. So would you mind sharing how's the situation in your region?
Yeah, of course. So like you said, in Oklahoma, there's a very high prevalence, and the group had reached out to us for clarification on that. And I'll say again that we do controlled exposure in our gilt population at about 5 weeks of age. And so we're constantly testing that lung homogenate for mycoplasma, but we also test it for all the other major viruses to make sure that there's no contamination. But from a downstream pig or finisher pig standpoint, the gilt acclimation program has really provided some stability in our herds. And so there is one flow that had previously attempted a mycoplasma elimination, had failed. And so I would call it a mycoplasma positive sow farm. Those downstream pigs, we consistently find it in the finisher phase, and we know that they're positive in the late nursery phase. I've found it on tracheal swab is about 7-8 weeks of age. And so we've targeted some avalosin pulses right around that time that they do show positives on tracheal swabs. And we've been able to mitigate the downstream effects with that. But of course, long term, do plan on entering exposed gilts into there and over time hope to reach a level of stability. We're not at a place to do any myco eliminations at this time. And so gilt acclimation, again, is our best right answer to control mycoplasma. And we've been successful in doing that across our sow herds.
And just a follow up on that, Dr. Kitting, like, can you share with the audience what's your protocol, how you do the gilt acclimation for mycoplasma? Do you do usually the exposure to fogging, or is a different? What is your methodology for the gilt acclimation in the production system?
So previously we had used a cedar model, and we found a lot of variation in day 0, of course. So with using a cedar model, we were entering gilts that were still positive into sow farms. And of course, we did have a prevalence that were still positive at farrowing. And so we did at that time, when we defined that, we were seeing some myco in late finishing in our downstream pig population. But since moving to a fogging method at 5 weeks of age, we've been able to decrease the number of positives going into the sow farm, and we have no gilts that are positive at entry to the farrowing house, which is the goal. So,
awesome.
And how do you define stable there for mycoplasma? Do you specific sampling testing there to define the stable herd, or is about this gilting going negative into the breeding herd that defines the stable?
I pair the gilts going into the breeding herd and also the downstream pigs. If I'm unable to locate or identify any mycoplasma associated lesions, I consider that stability. And so in unstable farms, we find mycoplasma pretty regularly. And so that is what I would characterize as unstable. And I know that's not a very academic answer, but from a production standpoint, all I want to do is be able to demonstrate that I don't have it in downstream pigs. That's the goal.
And that's exactly what you say. There is not an answer that fits all in this process. And we had a call the other day with the advisory group that we discussed, and it was clear that there is regional difference the way that you deal with the disease, but everybody looks for that aim to improve the animal health of the population that work with. And a couple of things that was discussed, that was, well, there is changes in different periods of the year, there is changes in strategies to contain that. Can you share some of those things that were discussed that to improve the animal health and the challenge that the industry is currently facing?
Yeah, so heading into the winter, it's a perfect time to boost immunity. And so I said before, we utilize MLV in our sow herds specifically for PRRS. And so we feel like biannual administration of that has helped us reduce losses of PRRS. Not to say it does not prevent outbreaks, right? But it can reduce losses. So we utilize that program. And then from the coronavirus front, of course, PD, we do use killed vaccine, especially in farms that may have broke within the past year. Boosting that immunity, we believe that there is effects that can be seen using killed vaccine, especially supported by our serum immunity data that we've seen. And of course, serum and colostrum and milk immunity is, you can't predict, but it can be correlated, right? So if there is serum immunity, we're providing some sort of benefit to the sow and her pig subsequently. So a great time to boost her immunity, and named, PRRS and PED are our biggest ones that we regularly vaccinate for in our sow herds to mitigate losses associated with those viruses.
And that's it, guys. I hope you have liked the episode of today. Dr. Kitting shared with us a bunch of protocols for elimination, for exposure, and even to get stability in your farm from multiple pathogens, from mycoplasma, PED, PRRS. I think it was a really good episode for you to listen. I hope you guys like it, and see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.